Hello everybody, my name is JoyofCrimeArt, and out of the big three children's entertainment networks, Cartoon Network has always been my personal favorite. The exact reasons why are enough to fill its own entire video, but it was just something about Cartoon Network that felt different compared to the other channels. The shows, the presentation, the sense of experimentation, all this just clicked in a certain way that's hard to describe. However, like any channel that's been on the air for 30 plus years, Cartoon Network has had its fair share of ups and downs. And honestly, I think Cartoon Network right now is in one of the worst places it has ever been. On par with some of the darkest moments in the channel's history, to the point where I'm honestly a bit worried about the channel's future. And I'm not alone in thinking this. You look online long enough and you'll find people asking the same question. Is Cartoon Network dying? I mean, it's gotten so bad that Cartoon Network had to put out an official statement about it. But why are people saying this? Is there any validity to these claims? Or are people just overreacting? Only the people behind the scenes know for sure. But I think it could be helpful to look back through the channel's history over the last couple of years to try to figure out what exactly is going on. So let's dive in and discuss the sad current state of Cartoon Network. But before we get too much into the weeds of everything, we need some context. Why do people think Cartoon Network is dying in the first place? Well, there's several reasons, but a good place to start is probably with Cartoon Network's programming over the last few years. Or should I say, lack thereof. Here is a list of every ongoing series that was airing on Cartoon Network as of September 2019. And now here is a list of every ongoing series airing on Cartoon Network as of September 2023. Oh, and Craig of the Creek is in its final season, so really that's only like a half point. Though to be fair, this is a little misleading. Despite having more shows, Cartoon Network in 2019 was not the paragon of diversity that this list would make it out to be. Just because the show was running didn't mean that it actually aired all that much outside of premieres. If you look at schedules from around that time, it was mostly just reruns of Teen Titans Go and the at that point recently ended Amazing World of Gumball, with Craig of the Creek and Total Dramarama taking up the rest of the schedule, and the other shows taking whatever remaining scraps they could get. But still though, at the very least it was a good variety of shows to watch, covering all sorts of genres and tones, even if there wasn't always much of a way to rewatch them. However, things would begin to change in the following year. 2020 was a big year for Cartoon Network's parent company Time Warner, as they had recently been purchased by AT&T, who were preparing to launch their shiny new streaming service HBO Max. And things honestly looked pretty good, as it seemed like AT&T were wanting to push Cartoon Network as one of their major brands on the platform. However, in order to launch a new streaming service, you need shows, specifically shows that appeal to all sorts of different audiences, including kids and families. So with the launch of HBO Max, it meant that AT&T now had to divide their animated kid content between two homes. Shows like Looney Tunes cartoons and Jellystone, which had they been made a few years prior probably would have aired on Cartoon Network, would now be premiering on HBO Max. Not only that, but two pre-existing Cartoon Network shows, Summer Camp Island and Infinity Train, alongside two upcoming series, Tig and Seek and The Fungies, would also be moving to HBO Max as well. This definitely felt like a hindsight being 2020 type of situation, because I can completely understand why AT&T made this decision. They wanted to push HBO Max as the next big thing and wanted to show that their service had a variety of shows that the whole family can enjoy, and Infinity Train. And I'm not saying that HBO Max shouldn't have gotten these shows, though I do feel like by pumping so many animated series into HBO Max, it kind of took away from Cartoon Network's output, as in 2020 the only new series Cartoon Network was able to premiere was Thundercats Roar, which wasn't even a Cartoon Network original, it was a Warner Brothers show. It was also widely hated by critics and audience alike, and only lasted 10 months before being quietly cancelled. But hey, at least that's better than in 2021, where the channel didn't debut any new shows at all. Now to be fair, 2021 did see a lot of HBO Max programming like Looney Tunes cartoons, Jellystone, Tig and Seek, and The Fungies coming over to Cartoon Network for the first time. But that was only after they had premiered on HBO Max, so I don't really count them as new. And even then, most of these shows didn't air on Cartoon Network for very long, usually only a month or two, before being pulled from the lineup. The addition of these shows didn't really feel like a way to bring new shows over to the network. It felt like an ad for HBO Max. And the worst part was a lot of these series didn't even do well on HBO Max. In fact, kids' content did very poorly on HBO Max in general. That's one of the main reasons why HBO Max rebranded itself to Max earlier this year. When people think of HBO, they don't think of family entertainment, they think of incest. Kids shows didn't perform well, despite HBO Max seeming to make an honest push for them early on. I'm glad HBO Max tried to get into the children's animation market, because a lot of their output was honestly pretty good. And a good streaming service does need originals that appeal to a family demographic if they want to succeed. But part of me honestly wonders if some of these shows would have done better had they premiered on Cartoon Network. When you make a show for a streaming service, you just kind of throw it out there. It has to compete with everything else on the service. But when it airs on TV, it's a much smaller pond. People will watch it just because it's there. The show can grow an audience via reruns. I didn't see anyone talk about shows like Tick and Seek and The Fungies when they first came out, but maybe if they had premiered on Cartoon Network, more people would have watched them. Around the time AT&T took control of Time Warner, Cartoon Network also got a new president. The man, the myth, the legend, Tom Ascheim. And he had some unique ideas of where to take the channel. Tom Ascheim seemed to have one main goal in mind when it came to managing Cartoon Network. Make it a channel for everyone. He launched Cartoonito, a block that was dedicated to airing preschool programming, and he pushed it hard, with it airing 8 hours a day on weekdays and 2 hours a day on weekends at launch. Though the block would decrease in scope as time went on, airing only 1.5 hours each weekday, not at all on weekends as of the writing of this video. Cartoonito was still around, but it does not seem like it was the hit that Tom Ascheim wanted. But the other block he created, Acme Night, seemed to do a lot better. The block was designed to appeal to families, often airing movies and shows that skewed a little bit older than what Cartoon Network would normally air. Sure, you had movies that made sense, like the Minions movie or Scoob, but then you got stuff like DCU films, the Back to the Future trilogy, the Ocean's 11 films, Crazy Rich Asians for some reason. Seriously, I'm not gonna get over that. Why did this air? But when the movies ran short, they would sometimes air placeholder programming like Wipeout, The Carbonaro Effect. Family Matters? Family Matters has aired on Cartoon Network. I really don't know what to do with that information. It was jarring to say the least, but despite it all, the block seemed to be a bit of a success. It was announced that in addition to the weird movies and shows that are being acquired for the block, there was also plans to create new shows and specials made exclusively for Acme Night. Honestly, while being very different in structure, Acme Night kind of reminds me of what Toonami was like back in the day. Whereas a bit older skewed compared to what Cartoon Network would usually air, but could still be enjoyed by kids and adults alike. But with Cartoonito struggling and Acme Night being a success, it seemed like one thing was clear. Despite Cartoon Network being a network that for years had been targeted mainly at kids, the stuff that was performing the best was the stuff that appealed to an older audience. Despite the ups and downs though, it seems like Tom Ascheim's plan was working. Cartoon Network was becoming a channel for everybody. We had Cartoonito for preschool kids, Cartoon Network for older kids, Acme Night for families, and Adult Swim for grown-ups. There were even plans in motion to start airing live-action sitcoms on the network, attempt to appeal more to tween-age girls, which would have definitely been a choice. Before that could happen, plans were put on hold because AT&T decided to sell Time Warner to Discovery. Yeah, it turns out running Time Warner wasn't really a task AT&T was really able to handle. Just buying it put them in debt, and they leaned hard into HBO Max during COVID, releasing a lot of their biggest films on the platform day and day with their theatrical release. It was a bold move, and unfortunately one that came back to bite them, resulting in AT&T deciding to sell Time Warner to Discovery in exchange for Discovery to take on all of Time Warner's debt. And then it turned out that running Time Warner wasn't a task Discovery was really able to handle either. Whenever a company gets bought out, there can be a lot of corporate restructuring, which affected things at Cartoon Network. Tom Ascheim was out as Cartoon Network's president after only a little over 2 years, and Micheal Ouwleen was in. He was the president of Adult Swim and acted as interim president before Ascheim, and would now be running both companies. Let's talk about Micheal Ouwleen for a second. He's definitely a veteran of the industry. He had been with both Cartoon Network and Adult Swim practically since the beginning, as well as being the co-creator of the Adult Swim series Harvey Birdman, Attorney at Law. By all accounts, he seemed like a perfect candidate to run both companies. However, no matter the experience or the talent, he became president at a very unfortunate time. Because right as he was stepping into the reins of his new position, Warner Bros. Discovery president David Zaslav woke up and decided to choose violence. This is pretty well documented at this point, but for a brief recap, Warner Bros. Discovery was in debt, and Warner Bros. Discovery president David Zaslav's job was to cut costs by any means necessary. So he started removing tons of series from HBO Max in order to save money on residuals. He removed a ton of shows all across the board, with Cartoon Network being hit particularly hard. Tons of series were removed, and this wasn't just like a one-time thing or anything, it's still happening even today. It's not like they're just removing obscure stuff either, it's some big names. Dexter's Laboratory, Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends, The Marvelous Misadventures of Flapjack, Over the Garden Wall, OKKO, Infinity Train, and many, many more. They're all gone. Yet long live the Royals is a priority to them? pretty sure the only reason Long Live the Royals is still on Max is because I think Warner Brothers forgot they made it. But most of these series are still available to purchase on sites like Amazon or are available to watch on other services. Heck, some of these shows have even aired on cable in the time since. And there is a chance that some of these shows might come back to Max at some point in the future, or appear on the new WBTV Fast service that they're working on, but I think it's telling that when Warner Bros. Discovery are looking to see what content on their service was the most expendable, one of the first things they turned to was Cartoon Network. So yeah, Cartoon Network was not in the best of places. 2022 saw the premiere of We Baby Bears, which yeah, isn't the greatest show ever, but at least it was something new. But Cartoon Network just wasn't making enough new content to replace the older content that was ending. And I'm sure all these corporate buyouts were doing a number on production. It was completely understandable, but something needed to change, and all eyes were on Micheal Ouwleen to see what he was going to do. Tom Ascheim and Micheal Ouwleen had very different approaches in terms of how to run Cartoon Network. Tom Ascheim wanted to make Cartoon Network a channel for everyone, seemingly an attempt to attract an audience who may not have been interested in Cartoon Network prior. While in contrast, Micheal Ouwleen seemingly wanted to focus on appealing to Cartoon Network's core audience: adults. Yeah, I know, this blew my mind when I read about it. I would always assume that adults like me who care too much about this channel were just a vocal online minority, but that doesn't seem to be the case. As in an interview, Micheal Ouwleen said the average age of the Cartoon Network's audience was 29 years old. Apparently kids just don't watch cable anymore. They have YouTube and TikTok and streaming services to occupy their time. Cartoon Network just couldn't compete with Skibbity Toilets. Knowing this, Tom Ascheim's decision to try to have Cartoon Network appeal to a preschool and tween girl audience makes a lot more sense. But while Tom Ascheim seemed to try to make one last attempt to attract a younger audience over to the network, Micheal Ouwleen decided to do the opposite and lean into the channel's current adult demographic. 2022 was Cartoon Network's 30th anniversary, and Cartoon Network did a pretty good job celebrating, despite the circumstances, airing older series in the late hours of Cartoon Network, which was not only a pretty cool way to honor the channel's legacy, but was also a way to appeal to the nostalgia of older adult fans. But then, just a few weeks before the anniversary, it was announced that Cartoon Network Studios would be merging with Warner Bros. Animation. This blew up the internet, it trended on Twitter, and led to tons of people believing that Cartoon Network was in fact dead. Cartoon Network even had to make a statement about it, assuring people that this wasn't the case. But it kind of was. I admit I don't fully understand the intricate business aspect of all this, and from what I can tell, a lot of this information is still up in the air and behind closed doors. From what I can gather, Cartoon Network Studios is no longer its own separate corporate entity. It is now just a subdivision of Warner Bros. Animation. Which is ironic since that's how Cartoon Network started. It was a subdivision of Hanna-Barbera before being spun off into its own company. That's why you see the Hanna-Barbera logo in front of a lot of older Cartoon Network shows. I mean, from a business aspect, it makes sense, as Warner Bros. Discovery at this point owned 3 different animation studios that were all basically fulfilling the same purpose. Though the thing is, this might not have even been a Discovery decision, as the decision to move Warner Bros. Animation and Cartoon Network Studios into the same building was apparently decided before the buyout. Whether straight up merging the 2 studios together was always part of the plan is still unclear. And I mean, sure, Cartoon Network Studios still exist as a label, and the channel is obviously still around, but as its own standalone entity, it's gone. Which was a tragic thing to hear just weeks before what was supposed to be their big 30th anniversary event. But despite all the bad things that had happened, Cartoon Network did manage to pull off a pretty good anniversary. And even after the anniversary ended, Cartoon Network kept airing older shows, which I am not against. Cartoon Network was in a desperate need for something new to spice up their lineup. I felt like it was just the same reruns of Teen Titans Go, Gumball, and Cradle Creek on loop over and over again. They even started incorporating older shows into the bumpers, showing that this seemed to be a somewhat permanent change. The line between pandering to nostalgia and honoring your past can oftentimes be a bit hazy, but overall I think they towed the line pretty well. I mean, a good show is a good show regardless of how old it is. And it's cool that these shows can be introduced to a whole new generation of kids, while also acting with a nice dose of nostalgia for the adults. They got weird with it too. Sure, they aired the stuff you'd think they would, like Kids Next Door, Powerpuff Girls, and Courage, but it also got weird stuff like Tom and Jerry Kids, like, okay. I like seeing Cartoon Network airing these older shows, but at the same time, I didn't want these reruns to be a replacement for new content either. Airing older shows is a good way to supplement the channel's lineup, but it can only get you so far, and Cartoon Network was in desperate need of some fresh blood. But new content was coming, because we still have the series that were announced for Acme Night, like Unicorn Warriors Eternal from Samurai Jack creator Genndy Tartakovsky, and a new Superman cartoon titled My Adventures with Superman, which both were expected to come to Cartoon Network in 2023. Finally, some new content, and content that seemed like it would be a breath of fresh air for the network. But then, only a few months before both shows were set to premiere, it was announced that both series would be moving to Adult Swim. Adult Swim would now be starting at the 7 p.m. time slot. I mean 6 p.m. time slot. 5 p.m. time slot is what I meant. What? Okay, so there's a lot to unpack here. First, let's talk about Unicorn and Superman. These are kid shows. Like, just watching them, it's very clear these shows were meant for kids. Older kids, sure, but Cartoon Network has aired worse in the past. There's nothing in these shows that makes it too mature to air on Cartoon Network. These shows were just moved over to Adult Swim strictly for marketing reasons. Because while Cartoon Network had been struggling, Adult Swim had been faring a lot better, being one of the highest rated channels on cable for 18 to 35 year olds. Which, I mean, cable isn't doing that well nowadays, so it's not as impressive as it sounds, but still, a win's a win. A lot of people online defended this decision, saying that these shows were better off on Adult Swim because they would be treated better there, as Cartoon Network has had a history of mistreating their action shows in the past. And the thing that annoys me is, they're right. Both these shows have been pretty big successes on Adult Swim, and I do think that had these shows aired on Cartoon Network, there's a good chance they wouldn't have done nearly as well. But consider this, when was the last time Cartoon Network really tried with an action show that wasn't just aired out of corporate obligation? Justice League Action back in 2016 maybe? That was a long time ago. I mean, Cartoon Network used to air action shows all the time in the 2000s and early 2010s, and with Cartoon Network's primary audience being adults, now might be a good time to try again. But no, these shows were moved to Adult Swim seemingly because the higher-ups at Warner Brothers simply see Cartoon Network as too invaluable as an asset. They didn't want these shows that they thought could perform well to be wasted on the channel. Granted, both shows did briefly air on AcmeNet as part of a marathon, but they didn't premiere there. By and large, these shows are now seen as Adult Swim programming. And if that wasn't enough evidence to show that Warner Bros. Discovery didn't see value in Cartoon Network as a channel anymore, let's talk about Adult Swim's new start time. 5 p.m. The sun is even down by 5 p.m. And that's if you're living in the Eastern time zone. If you're living in the Central time zone like I did growing up, Adult Swim will be starting at 4 p.m. By the time kids come home from school and do their homework, they're not going to have time to watch Cartoon Network. Keep in mind, with the new changes, Adult Swim now runs for 13 hours a day. Adult Swim, which started out as a block on Cartoon Network, is now longer than Cartoon Network itself. When you look at it from a business standpoint, this decision makes all the sense in the world. Television channels are funded by advertisers, and advertisers will only pay money if their target demographic is watching. If Cartoon Network's primary demographic really is 29-year-old adults, then a toy company or whatever isn't going to want their ads on the channel because they know that the viewers aren't very likely to buy their products. So if your main audience is adults, then why not lean more into the adult half of your channel that's doing significantly better than your child-friendly half? Even with the loss of these shows and the loss of their time slots, these Cartoon Network can compensate with their impressive back catalog of content, right? Oh my god, they took the kids! You see, Adult Swim launching at 5 p.m. is all fine and good, but the problem is, what are they going to air? Typically, Adult Swim would ease into the more adult programming with lighter content. You don't want Rick and Morty airing right after Craig the Creek, you know? But the problem is that Adult Swim simply doesn't have enough later content to fill up the vast amount of time they were acquiring. Which is why Adult Swim announced the launch of Checkered Past, a programming block that would be dedicated to airing classic Cartoon Network programming, in a similar style to T-Nix The Splat block, airing Monday through Friday from 5 to 7. So Adult Swim basically took Cartoon Network time slot in order to air Cartoon Network shows. To be fair, I do like how they're doing something creative with the extra time slot instead of just spamming more King of the Hill or something. Everything involved with the presentation looks super top notch, from the name to the bumpers, the use of the seldom used skull and crossbones CN logo designed by Mike Lazo, the original Adult Swim president, which is a deep cut reference. Honestly, the block looks really cool. Why is it on Adult Swim? Now I know what you're probably thinking, oh, who cares if Checkered Past is on Adult Swim or Cartoon Network? If it's airing Cartoon Network shows anyway, then it doesn't really matter. But it matters to me, dang it! It's just the principle of the thing. It'd be one thing if these classic shows weren't being aired anymore. That has happened before, mainly with some of Cartoon Network's action shows moving over to Adult Swim's Toonami block, like Symbiotic Titan or Thundercats 2011. But that felt more justified because those were shows that seemed unlikely Cartoon Network would ever air again. I mean, they barely tolerated airing them when they were still running. These classic shows that would be airing on Checkered Past were the type of series that Cartoon Network had been airing fairly recently, and now there's a good chance that Cartoon Network might not be able to air these series anymore. Guidelines seem to be pretty strict for these kind of things. You don't want Cartoon Network and Adult Swim airing the same shows. That's just asking for angry letters from parents. Airing older content was one of the few things Cartoon Network had going for itself. Also, doesn't it just kind of sting to see Cartoon Network as such a low priority to the higher-ups at Warner Bros. Discovery, they don't even seem to be trusted with their own back catalog anymore. I know I praised Cartoon Planet before, that's basically the same concept as Checkered Past, but Cartoon Planet came out at a time when viewing these older series was a lot more difficult. It was targeted mainly at kids, who likely didn't have a means to watch these shows, as well as introducing them to these classic series for the first time. But does Adult Swim really need a nostalgia block? If an adult really wants to watch these older CN shows, they have options, and options a kid would be a lot less likely to have. So Cartoon Network lost most of its new original series, either to Max or Adult Swim. They lost most of their back catalog, with it either being scrubbed from streaming or moving over to Checkered Past. They lost their own independent studio, being forced to work within Warner Bros. Animation, and they lost the majority of their time slots. I mean, at this point, what is there left to lose? They also lost the majority of their on-air promo department. Dang it! Sure, Cartoon Network started airing Summer Camp Island again earlier this year, airing the HBO Max exclusive seasons for the first time, and then getting to premiere the final season. And literally, right as I'm working on this video, it was announced that Tiny Toons Luniversity and the Heroic Quest of the Valiant Prince Ivandoe would be premiering on Cartoon Network this fall, which is genuinely great news to hear, and I don't want to downplay it. But given all the stuff that Cartoon Network has been going through as of late, it kind of feels like putting a band-aid on a severed limb, you know? This feels like Warner Bros. Discovery just doesn't value Cartoon Network very much as a channel, resulting in this endless self-repeating cycle where Cartoon Network underperforms, so they move any new content to either Max or Adult Swim because they think it will do better there, which only causes Cartoon Network to underperform more because they don't have any new content. Because Cartoon Network's current lineup just ain't cutting it. Like really, what do they have? There's Teen Titans Go, but that show has been running for over 10 years now. And with the creators working on big-name Hollywood films like the Mario movie and the upcoming Flintstones film, I'm honestly wondering if they're even going to want to keep working on the show for much longer. It seems like they have better things to do with their time. But even if they do want to keep working on the series, or they leave and the series just goes on without them, it's still a show that's been running for over 10 years. While the show is still pretty big, its popularity definitely peaked around 2017 or so. You have Craig of the Creek, but that show's on its last season. We Baby Bears is still going strong, but outside of that, all you have is reruns of cancelled shows like Clarence, the Looney Tunes Show, and Gumball. And while I doubt that these shows will be moved over to Checkered Past due to how relatively recent and overall kiddie they are, it's still telling that Cartoon Network's current #1 show is Gumball, which hasn't aired a new episode since 2019. Cartoon Network does have some upcoming programming though, but most of them don't really inspire a lot of confidence in me. There's the Craig of the Creek spin-off series Jessica's Big World, which comes out later this year. However, the series also has episode order cut in half before the show had even aired, which does not seem like a good sign for the show lasting very long. Plus, while the show will be airing on Cartoon Network proper, it was originally intended for Cartoon Nito. So I kind of wonder how well the show is going to do at attracting an older demographic when the show is made with a younger audience in mind. I have similar concerns about the upcoming Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends preschool series that was also originally intended for Cartoon Nito. The Amazing World of Gumball is set to return for a 7th season. I know a lot of people are excited about this, but I'm kind of not. Gumball is a great show, don't get me wrong, but the creator chose to end the show at season 6. So it doesn't really feel like Cartoon Network chose to revive the show for artistic reasons. Rather, it feels like they need to revive Gumball because it's their most popular series. But even with the revival, it's still a show that's been on the air since 2011. You also have shows like Invincible Fight Girl, Batu, Gross Girls, Ayanu, Child of Wonder, Jade Armor, Totally Spy Season 7, the new Total Drama Island revival, and the upcoming Powerpuff Girls series. Overall, a pretty hefty list. On paper. Here's the thing, I'm not convinced all these shows are going to actually air on the network. Warner Bros. Has this habit when it comes to announcing shows, where they say that the show is coming to Cartoon Network and Max, only for the series to never end up coming to Cartoon Network. Some shows I feel have a better chance than others. Invincible Fight Girl and Batu I think have a pretty good chance of ending up on the channel, but who knows, it could just easily end up going straight to Max instead. The new Total Drama revival and Jade Armor were all announced for the network, but these shows have aired in other countries already with no words of a US release. If Cartoon Network was really going to air them, why haven't they done so already? The upcoming Powerpuff Girl revival I also feel could possibly come to Cartoon Network, but if Cartoon Network is really performing so badly, wouldn't it kind of make sense for Warner Bros. To find another home for their big cash cow franchise? Not to mention the fact that TV standards are way different now than they were back in the 90s. If the Powerpuff Girls came back on Cartoon Network, they would have to tone down the violence. I mean, the 2016 2016 show was proof of that. But on Max or Adult Swim, I don't know, it might be more of a fit. Especially if they end up airing Powerpuff Girls on Checkered Past. But I could see this going either way, honestly. Gross Girls, I'm not convinced is coming out, period. And there's just like Ayanu, Child of Wonder, an action cartoon based on African mythology that looks to be about the same tonally as Unicorn or Superman. Those shows ended up moving to Adult Swim, so I feel like the same thing could happen here. Or Totally Spies Season 7, a continuation of a French action show that most kids have probably never heard of and hasn't aired on Cartoon Network in almost 20 years. Yeah, I somehow don't see this airing next to Teen Titans Go. I feel like this show will end up moving to Adult Swim or more likely Max. Now, I could be wrong about some of these predictions, but let me just say, I hope I am. I would love to see these shows actually come over and inject some new life into the network, but that just doesn't seem to be the path the channel is heading. Cartoon Network and cable in general just doesn't seem to be popular with kids anymore, so it makes total sense for Warner Bros. Discovery to invest more into Adult Swim and Max as a result. But if kids aren't watching cable, and Cartoon Network's main audience is adults, then that raises the question, does Warner Bros. Keeping Cartoon Network around to even make that much sense from a business standpoint? When it was announced that Adult Swim would be taking over half of Cartoon Network's airtime, a lot of people's minds immediately went to Noggin and The N. That channel followed a very similar model, with Noggin airing during the day and The N at night, only for them to eventually split off into two separate channels. Noggin became Nick Jr. and The N became Teen Nick. So people started wondering, what if a similar thing happened here? Like, if Adult Swim is going to take so much of Cartoon Network's runtime away anyway, then why not just give Adult Swim the whole channel and spin Cartoon Network off into its own separate channel entirely? And to be fair, this wouldn't be entirely unprecedented. In most overseas countries, Cartoon Network is a 24-hour channel, and Adult Swim does have its own channel in Canada, so who's to say it couldn't happen here? Earlier this year in Canada, they ended up rebranding the channel Teletoons as Cartoon Network, turning the old Cartoon Network channel into Boomerang. So maybe they could do something like that here. Turn Cartoon Network into Adult Swim, turn Boomerang into Cartoon Network, and turn Discovery Family into Boomerang or something. I mean, what is Warner Bros. Discovery really doing with Discovery Family these days? I mean, it wouldn't be the worst idea. If Adult Swim is really doing so much better, it would make sense to give it its own channel. And while Cartoon Network would be regulated to a channel with much smaller viewing numbers, it wouldn't really matter all that much if the episode still ended up coming to Max the next day, especially if kids really aren't watching cable anymore. I do feel like both networks would have enough content to fill a 24-hour runtime if Warner Bros. Discovery really wanted to do this. The channels probably wouldn't have the most variety, but that's never stopped a cable network before. I could picture looking something like this maybe. Personally, I honestly wouldn't mind if they went down this road. I love Cartoon Network and Adult Swim, so each having their own channel would just be more of a good thing. But do I think this is going to happen? Realistically, probably not. I think the far more realistic path is a lot more bleak, where Cartoon Network basically just continues to run on autopilot, with most of Warner Bros. Promising new series either going to Adult Swim or Max, with Cartoon Network continuing to get the cable scraps or relying on Teen Titans Go and Gumball reruns in order to pay the bills. Basically, I'm saying that Cartoon Network will end up becoming like modern Nickelodeon, which horrifies me. So to answer the original question, is Cartoon Network dying? Well, I think that's a difficult question to answer because I think the question can mean a lot of different things depending on who's asking it. Like, what do we mean by Cartoon Network here? Are we talking about the channel, the brand, the studio, the abstract philosophical concept of a Cartoon Network? The channel is obviously still around. It might only run for 11 hours a day, but it's still there. And the brand is still going strong. Regardless of how the channel itself is doing, Cartoon Network is still a brand that millions of people have an attachment to. Warner Bros. Isn't going to just give that up. Plus, while Adult Swim might be doing better than Cartoon Network here in the States, the brand has always done better than Adult Swim in overseas territories. The studio is still around, but only as a subdivision of Warner Bros. Animation, so that really depends on your definition of dead. In the spirit, I mean, it's still there. You can tell that they're trying their best with the minuscule resources they have. But man, it's been hard being a Cartoon Network fan for the last couple of years. But at the end of the day, does it really matter? I mean, is it really a big deal if X show ends up airing on Cartoon Network or Adult Swim or Max as long as it's made available somewhere? Does channel schedule even matter if cable is dying and everything can either be bought or streamed digitally? Is Adult Swim encroaching more and more on Cartoon Network's time slot even a bad thing if kids aren't watching the channel anymore? These are all totally valid questions to ask. But Cartoon Network means a lot to me. I grew up with it. It's responsible for some of my favorite animated series of all time. And I'm sure that there are some kids out there that feels the same way. Come on, some kids still gotta be watching it, right? Don't they deserve shows just as good, if not better, than the stuff we had growing up? Don't they deserve to have their own memories of Cartoon Network? I know I've been pretty pessimistic throughout this video, and yeah, that's just kind of how the situation is right now. But Cartoon Network has gotten itself out of jams before. 2009 was seen as one of the worst years in the channel's history, but then 2010 came around and ended up being one of their best. So here's to hoping that Cartoon Network finds its way out of this funk, and reclaims its spot as the best place for cartoons. That said though, if old Cartoon Network shows just have to air on Adult Swim, then can you at least air Johnny Bravo again? Like, another show is seen as a bit quote-unquote problematic these days, but it's a really funny show and Cartoon Network refuses to acknowledge it or put it on streaming. Like, you're fine airing Rick and Morty incest bait and half the stuff there's on Toonami, so you can't tell me that you haven't aired worse. Just do it!
Yeah, whatever.
What do you think about the current Cartoon Network situation? Leave your thoughts in the comments down below. I genuinely want to hear what you all think. And if you like this video, feel free to like it, subscribe, and consider checking out my Patreon if you want to see more videos like it. And as always, have a great day.